James, is it really necessary to drive quite so fast?
More often than you...
Pierce Brosnan is one of the most famous stars, but he's hiding something he's been kept secret for decades, for years never talked about it before. In an emotional conversation, Brosnan talks about something he has kept secret during his whole work. What is it? That's been hidden deep down. Come with us as we look back at the hidden story of Pierce Brosnan and get to the bottom of what he's been hiding. A boy who didn't have a father and big dream. Pierce Brosnan was born on May 16, 1953 in the small town of Drogheda in Ireland. He had a lot of fights with his mother. May Smith was only 19 years old when she had him. She married Brosnan's dad, Thomas Brosnan, just 9 months before, but the marriage didn't last, and Thomas left the Pierce's family when he was young. Afterward, Brosnan said he had only met his father when he was 31. They had a cup of we had tea together, talked a little, and then split up. He could whistle well. I only know that they went for a walk and had a good time. Pierce once said that short moment was all he had of his father after his dad died. Life got it was even worse that his mom had to make the hard choice of giving up her son. She went to London to have a better life. Pierce did not learn as a nurse and was left behind. In Ireland, where he lived with family, he didn't see his mom very often. It happened often, maybe once or twice a year. A lonely and hard time growing up without both parents made Pierce feel sorry for Ireland. Was alone, and, in the 1950s, it was from people often looked down on families that were broken up. Afterward, he talked about how he wished for a feel at home and stable. When he was 11 years old, everything changed. Moved to London to live with his mom and William Carmichael, her new husband. It wasn't easy getting used to life in England. Because he was Irish, he stood out at school. Other kids made fun of him and called he was Irish and had a hard time fitting in, but there was good that led to a tough time for William's stepfather helped Pierce and were kind to him one day. Feel like you're part of a family. William took Pierce to the movies when he was young. To see the James Bond movie Goldfinger with Sean Connery in it. It was one of the first times Pierce remembers having a father figure. That show wasn't just it was an exciting event that left a lasting impression on him, but he didn't know it at the time. They put down a seed that would one day become very big. Pierce Brosnan would grow up to play James Bond, becoming one of the most well-known 0007s in history. When Pierce was a teen, didn't want to be an actor right away. When they were 16, he quit school with plans to become a business artist. He went to St. Martin's School of Art in London, able to draw well and see things in new ways, and this looked like his for a while path in life, but everything changed one day when he got lost in a small. Went to the theater and saw a fire eater present. That show made him feel something. It interested him for some reason. Was brave, exciting, and full of life. All of a sudden felt drawn to the world of doing. That spark led him to sign up at the Drama Centre London, one of the most well-known acting schools in the UK. It was known that the school was tough, and kids were taught way of doing things based on methods. For Pierce, he says those years changed him. Learned control and how to be a character, and most of all, how to discover his acting voice. It wasn't just about learning from experience lines. It was about making out who he was. He later talked about who he was and what he could do. Having it gave him freedom and a way to talk himself, something he had been wanting since his lonely childhood. He graduated in 1975 and started working right away. His big break in acting came when he was cast in the first British running of the Red Devil Battery, put in a show by the famous Tennessee Williams. Williams was so pleased with Brosnan's work that he wrote on a paper message, "Thank God for you, my dear boy." It went well. A big moment for the young actor from someone like Williams, sure that he was going in the right direction. Soon after, Brosnan showed up in a few There Are More plays and small TV shows. Jobs. But the main event in his big break came in 1982, when he got the main part in the TV show Remington Steele. The show did well, they said. A story about a strange and lovely con artist who says he is a police officer joining forces with a smart woman. The role of investigator Brosnan was smooth, smart, and always dressed well. People liked him because he had a natural mix of wit, style, and personality that made him. Steele ran to stand out on screen until 1987 and gave Brosnan exposure. And not only did fame change how people saw him, as smooth, sure of themselves, and alluring, those were the same traits that would make him great as James Bond. But long before he wore the famous suit, "My name is Pierce James Bond," it was clear Brosnan had found what he was meant to do. But when his Hollywood star was on fire, called with the part that had once slipped through his thoughts, a missed fate in 1986, Pierce Brosnan was only days away from becoming James Bond after years of hard work and building his fame. At the exact moment he had dreamed just about since childhood was finally here. The people who make the Bond movies had seen how he performed in the TV show Remington Steele. His charm, his good looks and confidence made him the best person to take over the famous part of 0007. It looked like everything was going his way. Brosnan had even gone through a screen that way test with a full James Bond setup, he who wore the dress and had the famous gun, and putting on a show that impressed behind the scenes. The Bond team was all set to name him the new James Bond. He was coming soon from agreeing to the terms and shown to the world as the next face of the series. But then something unexpected happened right before the official news from NBC. The network Remington Steele made a last-minute choice. They had already cancelled the show because its numbers were going down. The news that Brosnan was going to become all of a sudden James Bond stole the show. Well known and interesting to people again seeing him on TV because of NBC, they chose to bring back Remington Steele. For only a short time because of his contract. Brosnan was required by law to go back to the show that the Bond makers made. They didn't want to wait for him. Don't mix up James Bond with a TV, which made them quickly move on and gave the part to Timothy Dalton instead. It was a painful moment, he later talked about, as it broke my heart that he had worked so hard and just when it was about to happen the chance was taken away by watching someone else play Bond. Since you know how close he had come was hard. But he don't give up, he kept playing and got better. Took his time and knew that if the chance came up again, he would be ready. After 8 years, in 1994, that chance finally came back, but this time there were Bonds in the way that the Bond makers saw Brosnan was. The Tim Dalton had found the right person for the job. Quit after 2 Bond movies and looking for a new 007 led Pierce back. Brosnan, this time there was no stopping it. When it was clear that Brosnan was it was a big deal when a new James Bond movie came out in 1994. Moment for both him and the Bond business. He was 41 years old and had the ideal blend of maturity, grace, and energy. To talk about it later, Brosnan said it felt like a circle closing in on itself. A part he had almost lost for good was finally, after years of waiting, made him stronger, and he was ready. The chance to go into one of the parts in movie history. What happened next? Bond like no one had ever seen him before, cool, sure of yourself, and ready for a new era, the golden age of Bond. When I hit movie theaters in 1995, James Bond was no longer in the big screen for 6 years. The last movie, getting a license to kill with Timothy Dalton, had come out in 1989, and since then, a lot of thought about whether Bond still had a place in today's world. The Cold War was over. Things had changed in the action genre and people were used to new kinds of heroes. Some reviewers thought the show was out of date and stuck in the past. But GoldenEye changed everything. Pierce, he did a good job bringing Bond back to life. It looked like the right size for the room. Or maybe you got tired of it. His take on 007 was new and up-to-date, but still had that old-fashioned charm and style that fans loved, and he was sure of himself. And calm when things get tough, but he also made them feel and be vulnerable. Others said that balance gave his Bond more depth. praised him for giving the church new life part without trying to look like the cast. He didn't try to be Shaw before him. Roger Moore or Connery, he was just Pierce Brosnan, and it worked at the box. Golden Eye in The Office was a huge hit. Made a huge $356 million around the world. Number when it turned into the fourth the most money-making movie of 1995 and more money than all of the Bonds from the 1980s. Bruce Lee's James Bond movies were both big hits. Critics and fans have shown that the person could still do well in The World is Changing. After the rise of GoldenEye, Brosnan came back as 007 in Tomorrow Never Dies. This time, Bond had to deal with a new kind of bad guy, a media mogul who used news stories to control the world. In any case, the idea seemed new and even ahead of its time with fake press and news power, but Tomorrow Never Dies had a tough job to do. Came out just 1 week after Titanic, one of the most important movies ever. A lot of people thought Bond would be overwhelmed. But Brosnan showed that he could stay strong. The movie still made $333 million around the world. And made the company a lot of money. It proved that Bond could live through in a market where movies are highly competitive. This movie was where Brosnan really started to mix the basic Bond look with other modern action, but his 007 was still classy and smooth, but he was now also faster. The action gets tougher and stronger. Scenes were brave and exciting, and Brosnan took care of them with trust. The film's Michelle Yeoh, the Bond girl, was also different. Lynn wasn't just there as her role to be saved, she was just as good as Bond, and she was smart, skilled, and tough in every way. Gave the movie a new feel. 2 years ago, later that year, Brosnan came back for his third movie, The World Is Not Enough. The movie changed the series in a darker and more emotional way, looked into greater themes like loss of trust and personal pain. The Electra King played the movie's main bad guy. It was hard to understand Sophie Marceau. She was unpredictable and the first major character. Bond movies have a female bad guy, and her friendship with Bond grew. The movie gives the story dramatic weight. One of the greatest texts ever written, most exciting beginnings in Bond movies history. There was a little drop and it's very different now that you shoot in and out. A river chase by fast boats tempts. Brosnan gave him one of his best acts as James Bond, showing not just strength but also because of his feelings. He wasn't just, he was a man who was in pain and a spy. Despite some criticism, it's about loss and betrayal. For Denise Richards' job as a nuclear doctor, The World Is Still Not Big Enough earned $361 million around the world, which showed that Brosnan's Bond really did stay power and could keep the series moving forward. Then came Die Another Day in 2002. 21st Bond movie and the 41st of the brand. There were high hopes as the movie showed a lot of thrills. Die Another Day turned into Brosnan's most successful James Bond movie. It made almost $432 million around the world. Was a huge economic success, but also turned a lot of fans' lives around, and reviews thought the movie had too much use of CGI, pushed things too far, the silly electronics, and some of the people saw writing as proof that the balance of the game was shifting between. Brosnan had hit a level of style and substance at the height of his fame as James Bond, but behind the scenes, the mood was beginning to change. To move, the brand was ready for another change, but just when it looked like Roger Moore's Bond years, where Hollywood couldn't be stopped and had a surprise that would make everything different. The betrayal. After 4 very good years, Pierce Brosnan thought that James Bond movies, he said he would come back for a 5th, so I did. The world's last show, Die One More Day, had become the best, making the most money at the time. James Bond, nearly $432 million around the world, helped bring the series back to life with GoldenEye and kept it going strong. It seemed like everything for almost 10 years to a 5th adventure as 007. People loved him, and the media loved him, and most of all the makers during press seemed to love him too. Both of the 2002 shows for Die Another Day, Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson together, the makers of Bond for a long time had praised. They said about his work that they were, I'm excited to keep working with him. Brosnan, he left those talks sure that he would be back, but then something strange took place after all the praise and good luck. There was quiet and no news. News came out that fans were left. He thought the studio was just waiting because taking its time with the building. It had always taken a few years between Bond movies, but things were moving. Behind the scenes at the studio, thought about going in a new way for the Brosnan's name was quietly put on the brand, being pushed to the side in July 2004 while the Bahamas were used to film after the sunset. Brosnan got the call that made things different. His stay at the home of everything he was Richard Harris, a good friend who had passed away 2 years ago. It was a quiet spot where memories are kept alive. Thought about it, and now it was the scene to remember. One of the worst times of the phone call came from Brosnan's job. Spies told him that talks were going well. For the next James Bond movie had ended. The studio was not making progress. They did not describe the reason, they just told him they're not sure what they want to do. Will they call you next Thursday? An unclear message made Brosnan feel lost and not at ease, but what happened next was even worse. Feeling upset soon after, he spoke straight to the producers. Barbara Korn was the first person to speak. Being one of his biggest fans for years and even fought to get him back in 1994, when others didn't believe him. Now her voice was full of feeling, and she was through tears. She told Brosnan it was over. He wouldn't be coming back. As after James Bond, there was Michael G. Wilson. Kept cool, worked hard, and kept it short. Thank you for being a great James Bond. That was pretty much it. After 4 movies, $1 billion at the box office, and 10 years of hard work, Brosnan was later in interviews, they were quietly fired. Brosnan talked about how he felt in a few. I was shocked and hurt by the words. It wasn't just kicked out, it was about giving up a part, it was about how dealt with. There wasn't a proper goodbye. He wasn't given a real reason and wasn't told he had done something wrong. He had given numbers that broke records and helped save, but it didn't work out in the end. Fans didn't think the choice made a difference. Also shocked, many people thought Brosnan would come back for one last movie, letting him go in a proper way. Instead, there was silence in the room. After a few months by the news that a new Bond had been Daniel Craig in roles in the years that Brosnan slowly began to speak after him. He was more honest about what had happened. He made it clear that he wished to. He even joked that he would keep going. Have been James Bond for 5 years, maybe even 6 times if they had asked, but he didn't. Wasn't really angry. He didn't blame Craig, who he praised for having a great time, as it was meant to make people feel bad. Who made the choice without telling him? Having a proper chance to say goodbye. Later said bad things about the company, calling their choice was lackluster and creative. Bravery, he thought they were being safe by letting him go instead of going somewhere new with a Bond guy who had already shown he could do well. He thought he wasn't old enough for the part, and a lot of his fans didn't either. He thought he still had something to offer, but Hollywood had already decided for Brosnan. It taught me how fast in the movie business, things can change. At one point, you're being called the one minute you have a perfect Bond and the next changed, but he still chose to handle it with grace. While he told them though the choice hurt, he didn't let it break him. Looking back, Brosnan said, don't bring sorrow into my life. That leads to more pain and regret. Instead of letting the loss define you, he used it to push himself to move. From then on, he started taking on new roles. Looking into different characters and being proof to himself and the world that he wasn't just 007. He also said that a part of him to move, Bond had to kill himself. The part had grown so big of who he was that moving away was like giving up a part of himself. When he did, though, a new piece of writing started. What Brosnan did next would show everyone that he didn't need a dress or a permit to kill to shine, becoming after Bond when Bruce Willis's run as James Bond was over. In the end, it made him feel very strongly about he had been known for almost 10 years. The thing that 007 had in the world brought him fame and wealth. But once it was, there was pressure and hopes over. Brosnan had to figure out who he was. Without the suit, the tech, and he had to explain the Bond name in his own words. Kill Bond to move his first story along. In 2005, the next step was to take big bets. He had a lead role in the dark comedy The Matador. That changed everything viewers saw expect from him backwards. Instead of Brosnan is portraying a smooth hero, Julian Noble was a worn-out, unkempt hitman. Julian wore loud shirts, drank too much and got lost, walked around hotel halls in just his underwear. Was the exact opposite of Bond. This brave move paid off. Critics loved the show, calling it brave, funny, and a Golden Globe was given to honest Brosnan. In the running for Best Acting, it was the first big sign that he might break away from the idea of James Bond and do well as something completely new, and more importantly, he wasn't afraid to laugh, as shown. A look at himself or the public's. He took an idea of who he was in 2006. Seraphim Falls takes another turn. Gritty story set after the Civil War, in which he played a man on the run trying to stay alive in harsh woods. The movie was quiet. Brosnan is serious and lacks glitz. There were times when the character barely spoke, his body and face showed how he felt. Tongue instead, it was a rough and impassionate show that proved he could carry a movie without any help from bombs or charm. Around this time, Brosnan also began to get more power. Over the course of his work in the late 1990s, during his time as James Bond, he had helped start a production company called after leaving the 0007. Irish Dream Time. He put even more effort into this part. He began making movies that he believed in, giving himself a way to try out different jobs, movies and stories that Hollywood might not usually give him. This move gave him both liberty and the power to make things. In 2008, no one saw what P.S. Brosnan did coming. He sang in the movie Mamma Mia. Movie based on the popular ABBA musical. Brosnan joined a group full of big names that had Meryl Streep, Colin Firth, and Amanda Seyfried. Set the movie free of lots of happiness, color dancing, and Sam Carmichael was played by a singing brother. One of the three likely fathers of a daughter of Meryl Streep's character. It was sweet, silly, funny, and romantic, nothing like anything he'd ever done before. And after the movie came out, people in theaters loved it, but not in fact, everyone loved the way he sang. Many of Brosnan's song numbers were made fun of, and videos of his performance, they became internet memes very quickly. Some it was a joke that he sang like he